Wednesday, November 8th, 2023, Maneco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. Today, we're going to look at how the Leviathan state is destroying the UK economy through taxation and inflation. And before we start, I like to go through a couple of quotes. The first one is from Goethe, and this is what Goethe said: "None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they're free." Keep that in mind. The other one is from Frederick Bastiat, who wrote The Law, and I highly recommend this book. You can get a free PDF online. What did Frederick Bastiat say? "The state," he declared, in perhaps his most memorable epigram, "is that great fiction by which everyone tries to live at the expense of everyone else." And just to be clear, I'm not taking political sides here. I'm just looking at two different philosophies here, and it applies to all social and commercial or economic transactions that people will ever do in their lives. And it's very simple. It's binary, as they say. You can either act socially or commercially with each other voluntarily or freely. So what does that mean? Well, you don't steal or lie or cheat. You do it honestly, voluntarily, you add value, and that's how you do it. The other way, of course, the second way, is through force. And the only institution, of course, who can act through force, legally through force, or as Bastiat says, legal plunder, is the government. So there's only those two. I'm not here to talk about socialism, capitalism, or fascism, or any of that. And I'm not here to try to blame the Tories or Labour, because as you will realize, hopefully, this is not a problem of party. It's a problem of philosophy, in my opinion. So, and I'd like to add that this is not just happening in the UK, and I'm not here to bash the UK. I've been here since 1992. And one of the reasons I do these videos is to help wake people up, hopefully, because I think this is, how can I say, philosophical, and it's also, people need to learn about this. People are too busy, of course, with their lives, trying to make ends meet, to look into these things. And of course, that's what Leviathan wants. They want you distracted. And there's loads of distractions right now, isn't there? But I think this is one of the most important things we need to look at. And you'll realize that it doesn't really matter if Starmer becomes prime minister or Labour comes to power. If taxation, heavy taxation, was the solution, and big government was the solution to everything, New Labour wouldn't have lost the election in 2010, and the Conservatives probably shouldn't lose the election in 2024. And you will see what I mean here. So, and I think it's interesting to talk about GDP, because this week on Friday we've got the GDP data for the third quarter, and GDP is gross domestic product, and it includes government spending. So keep that in mind, that the more government spends, the more deficit spends, the better GDP looks. But despite that, GDP is expected to drop in the third quarter by 0.1% from the previous quarter. Annualized, it's expected to rise only by 0.5%. But what I've got here is a report from Parliament. So from the House of Commons Library, and this was published by Matthew Keep on June 5th, 2023, Tax Statistics and Overview. So I'm going to put a link to this below in the description, and you can read the whole thing. And I'm just going to read a little bit of what Mr. Keep says here, a brief summary, and then we're going to go through the numbers. In 2022-2023, so that's the fiscal year from April to April, UK government raised over 1,017 billion in receipts. So there you go. There's the big number. And I will come to inflation as well in a minute. So that's basically just over £1 trillion. And I'll come to GDP as well. A lot of times we're told when they talk about GDP, they only talk about the growth. They don't talk about the real GDP number, the how much the country actually produces. Income from taxes and other sources. This is equivalent to around 40% of the size of the UK economy as measured by GDP, which is the highest level since the 1980s. Well, when he says around 40%, he's being very generous there because we're going to come to that in a minute. Most receipts come from three main sources: income tax, national insurance contributions, and value-added tax. Together, they raised around 586 billion in 2022-2023. I'm going to go over here the taxation by who pays the most tax in terms of those who earn the most or the least, what's the proportion? Because some of you might say, well, the very wealthy, they can put their wealth offshore. They don't pay any tax. And I agree with that. There are those who do that. And there are those who do that who I think are totally immoral. A little bit like, I think it's Baroness Moan. She was involved in a lot of, I can't really say, allegedly corruption. And she put millions of pounds abroad offshore. But I would say, just ask yourself this question. Because not everyone who does well and becomes very wealthy is a crook or acts in a bad way. Most people work hard, do the right thing, they get lucky, and they still pay a lot of tax. And if they get a huge windfall, why wouldn't they use the rules and regulations to try to avoid paying even more tax? Especially when you're going to see how wasteful taxation has become and how big a proportion of the economy it's become. So I'd like to say that off the bat here. But as you can see here, this is from this report, individual taxpayers, income tax paid by income. Income tax payments are concentrated amongst those with the largest incomes. The 10% of income taxpayers with the largest incomes contribute over 60% of income tax receipts. So I'm not trying to defend anyone here. I'm just giving you the numbers. So when the Labour Party comes out and says, we're going to tax the rich to make sure that you're better off, well, they're already taxing the rich a lot more. Let's get to the numbers here. And this is really interesting. And I have to thank someone I watched, a little clip on TikTok who spoke about this. He covered it, though, in a different way. He divided the total tax receipts by the number of days, number of hours, and seconds, and basically showed you how much they're ripping you off. My point here is to show you how they're ripping off the economy, the voluntary economy. I'm not even going to say the private or free market economy. So here are the numbers. Public sector current receipts, 1,017 billion. So income tax is the biggest part there. National insurance, VAT, corporation tax, capital gains tax. I guess that's what capital taxes are. Council tax, fuel duty, business rates, tobacco and alcohol duties. And the interesting thing here is that they've got these other receipts and other taxes. Why aren't they telling us exactly what that is? So there's another one. Maybe a lot of the stuff that's been going on to the Ukraine, or a lot of the kickbacks. Who knows? But there's almost 200 billion there. So I looked at GDP, and I found GDP on this website, Statista, and they take their data from the Office of National Statistics. And the reason why I went to Statista is that through the ONS's website, it's really hard to find the quarterly data, the actual amount of production the UK economy had every quarter. But I'm going to put a link to this page in the description, and you can look at it yourself. But I've calculated that on average, in 22 to 2023, the fiscal year, the UK GDP grew around 500. Well, it didn't grow. The GDP was 570 billion each quarter on average. So I multiply that by 4, and I get a number at 2,280 billion, or 2.28 trillion. So if you take that 1,017 and you divide that into that number, you come to 44.6% of GDP. And Mr. Keep, I think he's trying to keep the numbers down, because he said it was around 40%. But it's actually, to be exact, almost 45% of GDP, this total tax receipts, or public sector current receipts. So it's a lot higher. And if you look at RPI, which is the retail price index, and why RPI? Because it's a higher number, so it's probably more honest. It's a reflection of the debasement of the currency, or AKA inflation. In 2022 and in the beginning of 2023, RPI was 13%. It grew annualized. So if you take 13% of the total economy, which is GDP, you get 296.4 billion. That it's not really direct taxation, but it's indirect taxation, because your purchasing power is dropped by 296 billion. So if you add that to the 1,017, right, you get 1.3 trillion really in taxes and inflation. And if you divide that into the GDP, which is 2.28 trillion, we've got 57.6% of the voluntary economy. The voluntary economy, 57.6% of that economy was basically expropriated through taxes and inflation. So that's why I quoted Goethe there about those who think they're free, right? So what's the solution? Well, I think the solution, hopefully, is that people learn about these things and they realize that there's only two ways to deal in life, or in a society, I would say. Socially, it's voluntarily, right? You don't force or intimidate people to do things for you, or to become your friend, or or anything. And if you do that, of course, it should be punished by the law. And the same thing goes for commercial transactions. Things shouldn't be forced upon us. It should be done voluntarily. We should have competition. But unfortunately, Leviathan state, the government has become so big, and it's a monopoly. Yeah, and many of you are going to say, oh, but we have this and this for free. But can you really tell me it's free? It might be free for those who are not in the voluntary economy, but it's definitely not free for those who are in the voluntary or private economy. They're on average giving away almost 60% of everything they produce to Leviathan. So yeah, the solution, of course, is not to bring in a new party, a new government. The solution is to really realize that the state is there to protect the individual from violence and from fraud, from theft. And how would the state do that if taxation would be minimal? Well, taxation would be minimal. It would only be used for that. And that's why I recommend you read this book. Frederick Bastiat goes over all of this. So how do I see things going forward? Well, I don't see things improving, especially for those of us who are in the voluntary economy. I am aware that millions and millions of you are dependent on this system, and you're going to fight for what you already get, and it's understandable. Is the solution something drastic, like cut everything off? No, I think it's something gradual. People need to come to the realization that things can't keep going like this. Can you really have an economy that's healthy when you tax almost 60% of the voluntary or private sector? I don't think so. So unfortunately, I think the only way this will resolve itself is through a huge crisis, or if there isn't a huge economic crisis, unfortunately, Leviathan state is going to become more and more draconian because it's going to try to hold on to its power to extract the wealth from you. So there you go. With that, let's quickly look at where the markets are this morning. It's 8:45 a.m. London time. We've got spot gold at 1968. It's down about a dollar. High's been 71. Low has been 1965. Silver is virtually unchanged, trading around 22.60. Low's been 40 and the high 68. Dow futures is up 15. NASDAQ down 12. S&P down 1, so fairly quiet. The stock market indices. To the currencies, sterling is down 0.25%, 122.70. The euro is down just under a quarter at 106.76. The dollar is up 0.2 versus the yen at 150.64. And the dollar is unchanged versus the yuan at 7.28. The Aussie dollar is unchanged, 64.38. The dollar is unchanged versus the Canadian dollar, 137.70. And the Kiwi dollar is unchanged as well, 59.35. To the general commodities, WTI crude is unchanged at 77.27. Brent is up slightly at 81.60. Platinum is down $4, trading at 890. And high-grade copper is up 0.5% at 373. The 10-year yield, U.S. 10-year yield is up 2 basis points, trading at 460. Yes, the UK government bond yields have come off. That will allow the government to inflate, borrow, and spend even more. And that's another way that they become bigger and bigger, the government. And that's the other reason why having gold and silver as money makes this harder. And why is that? Well, because if the government try to borrow as much as they do under a gold or silver standard, interest rates would go through the roof because there's not enough gold and silver out there. But when you have fiat currency, the Bank of England will just create it out of thin air, manipulate the markets, and keep inflating. So this might sound like good news, and it is, I guess, for the government and for borrowers out there. But in the long term, it means more and more currency debasement. So yeah, the 2-year now is dropped from over 5% some weeks ago to now 4.64. And even the 30 years come back below 5 to 4.75. And why has this happened? Well, because the Bank of England is going to give up already probably next year and start cutting rates, give up on really fighting inflation. The Bank of England is a creator of inflation for the government. So yeah, don't expect the Bank of England ever to destroy or stop inflation. So with that, I'm going to wish you all a very good day. Take care. Bye.